you know, obviously we all grow up in different environments that affect us in different ways, etc., etc. And you know, I'm a spiritual man. My spirituality and my sort of perceived idea of reality goes, you know, a lot deeper than my physical awareness and my physical presence. But you know, I believe that we're born into an environment that sets us up for our future, and you know, in our birth and the moment that we're born, we bring a certain level of awareness with us. This is my personal belief. So we bring a certain amount of level of awareness with us, and our environment teaches us a certain level of awareness. So how we learn in our environment is going to be affected by the awareness that we bring into the environment. And then our environment then teaches us how to survive when we go to school, when we step out of the front door. Now, when we step out of the front door, yeah, okay, we go to school, we go to preschool, infants, juniors, and etc., etc., and we're bombarded with stuff. We're bombarded with all kinds of information. We're bombarded with names for things. We're bombarded with languages, and we're bombarded with history and religions and sciences, and we're bombarded with arts and music, and it's just like blankets of information we just get thrown at us every day, just about for about 12, 13 years of our lives. We're just bombarded with it. But before we even enter that school environment, before we even enter education, we have already been taught how to survive. And you know, as I say, it depends on our family environment, it depends on our environment as infants. You know, whether we grow up in care, or whether we grow up in a loving family, a loving home, whether we grow up in a home that was fueled with violence and anger and bitterness and etc. You know, all of these things affect the way that we survive. All of these things have the potential to affect the way we survive, and have the potential to affect the way that we are going to, our outlook on life, kind of thing. So ultimately, before we even get to school, we have learned to survive. By the time we get to 4 or 5 years old, we have learned how to survive. And you know, and it's the same. You know, in many animal species, you watch animals and their infants. Their infants are greatly dependent on the parent or on the mother more often than not, and then they get to a point where it's like, okay, get out there and you know, and discover the world. Well, that's what we do. We get to 4 or 5 years old, and then we have to go out and discover the world. When we get to school, we see different levels of awareness in infants at school, at preschool and at nursery and stuff. You got infants that seem to have so much confidence about them and so much get up and go. They interact straight away with other children and even with other grown-ups and parents and stuff. You get some children that just won't let go of the parent's coat. They seem to be so nervous, so shy, and so attached to the parents. You get some infants that just non-stop crying, so fearful of the new environment. And you know, all of these things, we see all of these things in infants when we get to school age, but ultimately we learn how to survive before we get to school. So our home environment is the environment that ultimately sets us up for life. My personal view of school and of our blanket education is that we are to be integrated into a society, a manufactured society. And to be integrated in this society, it's like a production line. You know, you work in a factory, it's a production line, and if you work on a conveyor or something like that, okay, and alright then, you work on a farm, and the farmer's got acres and acres of fields and stuff, and he grows all kinds of vegetables everywhere and what have you, and you work on the carrot conveyor. Okay, so at one end of the far end of the conveyor, the farmer or whoever's been ploughing the field or whatever the word is, he's got big trailers now and they're full of carrots. Probably seen these trailers around full of carrots, and he dumps them at one end onto some conveyor feeder or whatever. So what happens now is all these carrots, they suddenly start working along this conveyor, and they come to you, to the post where you're sat or stood or whatever. And there's so many people along this conveyor beside yourself. Your job is basically to pull out the best carrots. Okay? You might have two piles, one for the best carrots, one for the not so good carrots. So you chuck some in there, you chuck some in there. But then each of those piles of carrots, so the good carrots will go along another conveyor, and the not so good carrots will go along another conveyor. And they'll also go through a sorting process. So the good carrots will be sorted. So the better carrots then out of the good carrots will go into one pile, and the worst carrots will go into another pile, and so on and so on. And each pile goes through this conveyor system until you are left with sort of categories of carrots, if you like. Best carrots, good carrots, okay carrots, not so good carrots, rubbish, right? This is the system. This is the system, this is how society operates, this is how our society operates. So basically, we are shown how to survive in our family environment, then we're taken to school, we're placed into an educational system. Now the educational system then separates us, just like the carrots. So you get the very smart kids, you get the smart kids, you get the kids that have got a bit about them, you got the kids who struggle, and the kids who really struggle. Okay, now that's just a general idea, but just so you understand where I'm coming from. So we're all separated in this way. But ultimately, it's this form of separation. We learn to take this idea and this form of separation, we take it on board. So it starts to define who we are, basically. And this, the more it starts to define who we are, and the more these separations and these ideas are reinforced, the more we start to see ourselves in this way. In truth, somebody that's separated and believed to be not so good at learning might actually be brilliant. However, the way that the system operates in society, this person's brilliance more often than not is going to be overlooked. So it is down to this person to find the brilliance within themselves. And if they can't, they fall by the wayside. They are ultimately that pile of rubbish carrots. This is not just the way that society then looks at this person, it's also the way this person looks at themselves. But by the same token, you might have somebody that's proven themselves as being having a good attitude to learning, etc., etc., and is regarded as a very good student, pupil or whatever. But this pupil, at the same time, might not see this in themselves. this person might actually see themselves as being a lot lower, or thinking of themselves a lot lesser than the way that they have actually been categorized by society. So this person still has the potential to fall by the wayside. But ultimately, this is what society does. So we have a system. Society is like a system. And we basically go through our whole lives thinking like this. We go through school and everything, and we go through school, we accept the idea that we have to achieve, we have to work harder, we have to be able to this and that, and be so good at maths and English and blah, 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 blah. And if we ain't so good at maths and English, and we're not very good at art and this and what have you, then we'll be left. We'll be pushed by the wayside. We'll be lost, fallouts of society, basically. And this is how we are educated to think. Everything about the way that we think, where society is concerned, is the way that we're being educated to think. And all of this is education, all of this is knowledge that we think we know. So, ultimately, we think we're either very smart or we think we're not so smart. But this is only what we think. Because ultimately, our smartness, if you like, is basically only as deep as the information that we've learned to take on board. The knowledge we think we know is being reinforced every day. Every day our knowledge that we think we know is being reinforced. We're being fed things on a daily basis, and if we're not being fed things on a daily basis, we're actually going out to look for things on a daily basis. And again, this is the knowledge that we think we know. The knowledge that we think we know that is very shallow. It needs to be topped up all the time. But this is the thing. This is the thing with the knowledge that we think we know. The knowledge that we think we know is materialistic knowledge. Materialistic knowledge because it's based on our material experience. It's fed to us via our material experience. But ultimately, this materialistic knowledge, or matter reality knowledge, we absorb this knowledge. It becomes who we are. This knowledge becomes our identity. So this is again another reason why we feel it necessary to defend this knowledge. You know, if we pass this knowledge on to somebody, and somebody challenges this knowledge, this again is the reason why we feel we must defend this knowledge, because this knowledge is our identity that is based on our physical experience. So, you know, identity ultimately, it's again, it's something else that we think we know. But ultimately, identity is how we can be identified. Now, my physical identity, I would be regarded as black, 5'8", or 5'7", 5'8", thereabouts. I'm probably regarded as underweight, to be quite honest with you, for my size and my age and all the rest of it. Short hair, slightly unshaven, but not all the time. But ultimately, all of these things make my identity. Now, okay, I could have earrings, I could have jewellery, I could have a chain around my neck, I could have face jewellery or whatever, I could have tattoos or anything, right? But all of these things make my identity. These things that I can be identified by, okay? Now, it's pretty fair to say that even everything that I've just described, there could be thousands of people that fall into that category, into that sort of mould of description, you know. There could be so many people that fall into that mould. So how would I be defined as an individual. This is where it starts to get even more complex, because now to really get to the nitty-gritty, I suppose, of my identity, is to like incorporate my possessions. One of my possessions being my knowledge, what I think I know. Okay? Now, you know, even if I speak about what I know right now, once you hear everything that I say I know, to you, this is just what I think I know. Because anything that I say I know, even if it relates to you, it's something that you have to experience for yourself to say that I know what I'm talking about. So until you have experienced anything that I say, everything that I say is just a theory. I personally believe that it doesn't matter what I say. We all still have to find out for ourselves anyway. So, you know, I know that anything that I say, you will see this and you will regard it as being my theory, etc., etc., until you've decided to examine it for yourself or you've experienced something for yourself. But as I say, my knowledge becomes my identity, as do my possessions. So now, if you wanted to define me, you could say, oh, you know, Pete, you could explain my physical appearance. And if that's not enough, yeah, you know, the guy that does this and the guy that does that, the guy that drives this and the guy that lives there and the guy that says this and the guy that thinks that and the guy... So you can throw all of these things into the equation to further bolster my identity when describing me to somebody else. I could use all of this when describing myself, basically. But all of this is how I think of myself. All of this information isn't what I know of myself. It's what I think I know of myself. And the reason why it's what I think I know of myself is because every single word that I use to describe myself is or was given to me. Every single word, every single description, every single thing that I speak of that describes me as a person was given to me. So I didn't know what fat was. I didn't even know that fat was a thing at some point. I didn't know what skinny was, or I didn't even know that skinny was a thing at some point. I didn't know what black or white was at some point. I didn't know what tall or short was at some point. I didn't know what right or wrong was, or good or bad was at some point. I didn't know any of these things until somebody gave me this information. Somebody gave me this information and I chose to rely on this information. But no matter how much I chose to rely on it, it still never amounts to anything more than what I think I know.